Okay, this week I want to start up where we left off on how to manipulate your Photoshop photo montage projects. So I'm going to go to Photoshop and I'm going to open up my Project 2 demo file that I started last week. And I'm just going to continue working with this composition. I'm going to go ahead and place another image in here, place embedded. And let me find our Core 3 folder. And let's see, let me find one that, this might work. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and place this image now on top of the composition I've already generated. And I chose this image because what I'd like to do is isolate these flowers, and I'd like to delete the background. So I'm going to go ahead and say that the placement is fine. And now I'm going to go and use some of the selection tools and show you what options I have here. Again, if I click on any of these little icons, there's other tools embedded in this icon. So there's a very simple selection method is to use these shape tools. And now if I select that, and for example, if I command cut that out, I might have to rasterize this first. Okay, my smart object is not editable. So I'm going to go to layer and I'm going to say rasterize the smart object first. Let me deselect. Layer, rasterize smart object. Now this will allow me to easily work with it. There might be a way to work with these smart objects. Let me see. If I go ahead and undo what I've just done and continue to make this a smart object. It doesn't do anything. Okay. There might be a way to use these smart objects in a smarter way, but I am not up to date with using these smart objects. So what I'm going to do is just, and this is a perfectly fine way to work, and it's the way that Photoshop has been built for many, many versions, just to have this image be rasterized. And now I can go ahead and select something, cut it out, and then paste it back in. But this still has a lot of the background in it, so this is not the best method for selecting something. Another way I can select is to use this lasso tool. If I do Command D, it will deselect everything. If I do Command, let's see, what is it? Select all. So Command A will select everything. Command D will deselect. I can use this lasso tool to draw around my selection, but this also is not the best way. I can use this polygon lasso tool to drop points to select, and this might be an aesthetic you're interested in, right? So you can use these tools if you want to create kind of hand cut aesthetic. So I can go ahead and do this and select my shape this way. If I double click, it will complete that selection. And then there's another thing called a magnetic lasso tool. And the magnetic lasso tool will find pixels that are distinguished from each other and will drop those points. I can go undo. It doesn't like me to undo it. So this also is not the best method because here I am drawing all over this thing. Deselect. Okay, another method. So all of these methods are older methods for selection, but Photoshop has developed quite a few better selections. Magic wand tool We'll select color value. Here it says the tolerance, so you could go ahead and select all of the red. But you see as I start to add color values, it starts to, so it's this magic wand tool is selecting based on the color value in the image. Then I have the object selection tool. Let's try that. Drag a marquee around the area that I want to select, and maybe it can isolate the object if it recognizes that flower as an object. And now we're getting into some image recognition algorithms that have been added to this particular software. There we are. And now we have our flower selected. And then let's try this quick selection tool, which allows you to paint your selection. Very similar. So now I have these two selected. Let me go ahead and zoom in here. And you can see that it's selected based on this very striking difference between the value of the red here and the green. So I have these two flowers that I've selected. What I can do now is I can go to the select and mask property. I have this bar is in my way here. Let me go back to my project. So I've already selected these things. What I can do is in my selection, say select and mask here. So if I do select and mask, it's not going to have my selection saved, but here now that I'm in my selection tool, I can say select and mask. And it's, oh, it has selected it. Okay, my apologies. Okay, we can look at the different ways here. Let's see, let's say show edge. Ah, there we are. If I increase the transparency, now I can see which part has been selected and which part is not. So I don't get the marching ants any longer, but there should be ways that I can change what I'm viewing. This allows me to use, if I use my Alt, it will erase part of my selection. And here I can, so if I use the Alt or Option button, I'm going to be erasing part of my selection by using, again, this quick selection tool. Refine the edge brush. Now this will be helpful because this has a good hardness to it. But if I wanted to have a softer edge, I can change that. And now what I can do is go in here and refine my selection. So anything that I've selected that I don't want in my selection, I can go ahead and erase. And this is how I can refine the selection that I've made. When I'm done, I can say okay. And now I can see that my selection's been modified. Maybe I want to get rid of this. So it's just another way to view your selection if you don't want to see the marching ants. Really up to you how you want to work. I can just do it here as well. Let me go ahead and start to erase some of this part of the selection as well here. So I am just isolating these flowers. And I'm just going to click. I have my option button held down. And now I have these two flowers selected. what I can do, let me zoom back out, is I'm going to go to select and say inverse, and I'm just going to delete everything else in that layer. And so now I have my, I'm going to say Command D to deselect. Now I have these two flower parts. And this is how you can start to refine how these images come together and how they interact, is by isolating parts of an image and then placing them with each other. So that's the different methods of selection and modifying your selection. Next, I want to show you how to use the clone stamp tool. And the clone stamp tool allows you to repeat parts of your image over other parts. So let me go ahead and hit Option here. I can make my brush by hitting the right angle bracket, bigger or smaller left angle bracket. And again, I'm going to go up to my brush properties, and I'm going to actually increase the hardness. This is just the edge around it. Here I'm going to go ahead and select. I'm going to go ahead and you can see here I've selected this part of the flower, and now I can drag and drop it like it's being stamped. If I decrease my brush, you see that I have to kind of paint it on. But what I'm doing, and you can see that little plus sign, is copying the pixels in one part of my image and painting them in another part of the image. So that might be useful for something like in this flower, to kind of cheat that piece of grass in front. But you see how the hardness of that brush doesn't look very good. I can go up here, decrease the hardness, and then maybe paint that in. Okay, so something like that, potentially. Okay, so that's how we use the clone stamp tool. Let me go ahead and place another image here. That's fine. These ones I've used already. Yeah, let's use this one again. I'm going to place a second image of that same photograph here. And this time I want to use a different tool, which is the patch tool. We have the patch tool, and what this will do is I can drag around a part of the image that I would like. Oh, again, I have to first rasterize this. I wonder here, edit the contents of the smart object. This is might be a way that we can dive into the smart object and edit it. And now I've basically pulled this part. This is almost the reverse of the clone stamp tool. I'm taking part of my image and I'm replicating another part over top my selection rather than using my selection to paint. I'm doing the reverse. I also have, let's say, the spot healing. And the spot healing, let me deselect. Spot healing is really for if you have like blemishes and things. This is some real Photoshop work here. Let me try to erase this spot and see what this looks like. And now it takes it averages some of the surrounding pixels, and it will fill it in. It will generate the pattern and fill in around that area. This again is the spot healing brush tool. But again, this hasn't, if I go ahead, let's say save, Go back to my project. There we go. So that's how I guess I can work with those smart objects without rasterizing. That's good to know. What I'll do is I will just double click on it. It will pull it up in a separate document. I can make modifications to this, and then this will show up in my composition here. So let's go back here and do the same thing. We'll do another spot heal, although this is quite a big spot, but we'll let the algorithm do the work for us. And now we have something that looks like just a little patchwork of grass. I can then use my, let me go back to my clone stamp tool, use my option to have my target, and then I can start to like fill in. I might wanna, for this, in this case, turn down the opacity and also the hardness, increase the size of my brush. And I can do some kind of little corrections and generate a more realistic texture for this grass. Okay. Okay, and now this is looking okay. Go ahead, file, save again. And drop back into my project to demo. There we go, and let me drop this below. I can copy all of this, paste it in. Maybe drag it to this side. And let me show you what I can do. Another thing I can do with any selection that I have. So let me select all for this particular layer. And under select, I can say modify. I can expand or contract my modification based on a number of pixels. There we see a little bit. This is such a large file that those pixels are there's too many pixels for us to really see. So let me go ahead and modify. I will contract this by, you know, maybe 30 pixels, and then we'll see a difference. There we go. And then I can say modify feather and how many pixels I want to feather. This means that it will have an opacity kind of linear curve that's applied to this edge so that it's at 100% opacity down to 0. So now if I go to select an inverse and let's say delete, oh, I can't do it because it's a smart object again, but let's say I want to, let's do again a rasterize of this layer. And delete, now I will have a feathered edge. Did you see that? Let me undo and zoom in and you can see that feathered edge, right? And so now I have a soft transition between those two pieces of background. Now let's say that I want to edit these two layers together. Let me go ahead, select this first one again, modify, or excuse me, layer, rasterize this smart object. I can collapse layers on top of each other. If I go to layer and say merge down, it will merge those two layers, see, into one layer. Or I can say merge visible and turn off the visibility for all these other layers. Merge visible. Now I can turn back on my other layers. And then the reason I might want to do this is now I can go in and use my clone stamp tool perhaps to combine these two. A little bit more realistically. Maybe give more variation between the two so that it does start to look like a seamless texture? Potentially. I mean, this image wasn't taken with that in mind, but you can find images, let's say, of textures and very seamlessly kind of extend them. Okay, so then I have this background here and I have my foreground of these flowers. I'm going to go ahead and clone stamp maybe this one again. Turn up the opacity. And also increase the hardness. Anything that has a hard edge, I'm going to maybe use a hard brush for. Then what I can do is maybe use my elliptical marquee or my regular lasso tool. I'll just select this part because I've already selected the extra pixels, right? Let me turn off the visibility of this layer. So everything outside this flower is transparent. Now I can go to edit, transform, rotate, and maybe rotate this to give some variety. Maybe I will do the same. I'll go ahead and hit this check. I'll do the same here to this little flower part and say edit, transform, flip horizontal. Okay, so now I have some more variety in the way that these flowers appear. All right, now I have, I'm using these fairly well, all of these tools. Next, I want to just quickly get into filters. There's a bunch that you can play with. You can use a blur filter. Maybe I'll use that on the background. A filter will just apply a, again, a kind of algorithmic treatment to the image. Blur, let's go ahead and just look quickly. Let's zoom far in here. Okay, so you can see the pixels. Every image, digital image is made, or any rasterized image, let me say that, because there's also vector-based image making. But every pixel-based image or rasterized image has a grid of pixels. It's a grid of squares, and each square is given a value. Go to my eyedropper here. If I go to let's say my color swatch here, see if I can find information. There might be an info window. If I want any windows, there's a lot of other windows here, a lot of other tools. But let me go to my info, and if I use my eyedropper tool, you can see that what I have here are a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel, and then a value associated with it. So these are screen-based, how colors, the combination of red, green, and blue, which are different, have to do with light, that these create every color that we see that is illuminated, that's screen-based. This is the print values. These are values associated with adding color. This is adding like ink together. So for inks, we have a cyan, a magenta, and a yellow, and then black. And so these are the values associated with print. Red and green make yellow, green and blue make cyan, and red and blue make magenta. Okay, so that's how these work. All of these together make white, all of these together make black. So the absence of any of this type of any of these values is white, the absence of any of these values is black. And it's anywhere the values from 0 to 255. Anyway, this is just to show you how this image is made up so you can understand something like when you add a filter. And let me select all for this particular layer. And I'm going to say blur, and I'm going to use, let's just use a blur more. And you see that it's averaging the values of all of the pixels to blur this image. So now we can zoom out here. And let me use my hand tool to zoom over. Let me go ahead and undo that and redo it. Blur more, blur more. So I can keep blurring this image. and it will keep adding a kind of blur. I can say instead Gaussian blur, which will bring up this box. It can zoom out. This will let me preview the blurring and the radius. This is just a type of blur. This is how I can blur something much more extreme. So I'll go ahead and say okay. Now I have a much heavier blur associated with that. I can go back and let me go and try maybe something in between. Zoom out. Maybe something like 8. Okay, now I have a little bit of a blur in the background. Other filters I have, adding noise, Stylize, which this will make it look like, for example, for these flowers. I don't really recommend using these filters, a lot of these Stylize filters, because they are immediately recognizable as Photoshop filters and there's nothing very unique about them. But if that's part of your concept, then go right ahead and use it. I am going to show you them. So for oil paint, for example, we can see a preview here. I might have to have a selection for this layer. Preview, there we go. Now you can see that this gets a kind of treatment that makes it look like it's been oil painted, right? The size of the brush. How smooth those lines are versus how rough. A lighting angle. So this gives a kind of texture. Now it looks like it's been kind of painted, maybe. Do the same thing for the background. If I want to repeat a filter I've just created, it'll be here. This is the last one that I used. So now I have this kind of oil painted looking like surface. Deselect it. I think you could maybe develop a concept that uses these filters in a clever way. But to just add visual interest, I would say find another way to add visual interest. These are kind of cheap. They look a little cheap to me. Sharpen is something that will, let's say, smart sharpen, where blur will, right? Blur will make things blurrier. Sharpen will make the distinction between these pixels more pronounced. I also, what else can we do? We can add, yeah, Pixelate is another filter type. Let's say Mosaic. This is another kind of this is a way that you can generate pixelated, the appearance of pixelation, where really what we're doing is we're reducing the values here. So you can create kind of 8-bit art this way easily. Kind of a video, a 1980s video game aesthetic. Let's try Crystallize. So this will fragment it in a more organic way. Change the size of the cells. Now we have a different kind of pixelation filter. Let's do the same thing to the background here. Okay. A couple filters that I do find useful for editing photographs. Lens correction is one of them. I don't think I have an image here that would really be appropriate for this. Let's see, we can maybe use this. Let me edit this image. So if I did lens correction, this allows me to correct for a kind of fisheye thing that happens. So I can, and I can also use this to exaggerate. I'm dragging, and now I can really make this more fisheye, or I can try to straighten it by dragging along in the image. And then I can use this level. That's this first icon. The second one is to, let's say I took a photograph of a street, but it's kind of not straight, and I can use the horizon line here to make this image more level. It doesn't work. Okay, so let's say I want to make this stem straight up and down. I can use this leveling to try to arrange this photograph so that the stem looks like it's straight. That's lens correction, which is a useful filter for photo editing. And then right, if I go and save, it should update it here. Although it said it couldn't save, didn't it? Save. Oh, I know why. It can't save because now that I've done that filter, it's changed this from background to layer 0. I'm going to have to flatten this image. And this is what you're going to have to do as well. So let's go ahead. Now I can save it. Okay, so every JPEG needs to just be one layer as the background. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay. And this is how I want you to be sharing your work with me, right? There we go. Now it'll adjust here. Unless it saved it as a copy, who knows? All right, but let's go ahead and let me get rid of this. And maybe I will merge these two visible layers together now that they're done. So I can say layer, merge visible. And then maybe what I'll do is use, let me turn back on some of these other layers that I created last week. I'm going to move this. And maybe what I'll do is just use my erase tool and erase part of this to reveal the background. Maybe I'll give it a softer. You know, whatever. I don't think it doesn't matter too much to me for this composition, what this looks like. I think maybe that's too much. I do care, even though I don't really care too much because it's just a demo. Maybe I'll do some stripes. And what I'm doing is I'm saying shift and while I select, I'm going to let up on the shift before I make my second line down. And this will just keep my brush straight. So what I need to do is click with the brush and then hit shift and it will make a straight line. Okay, turn this back on. Okay, this is going to be my kind of abstract composition here. Once I'm finished, I'm going to say layer, flatten image. So I'm going to save this as my Photoshop file, but then I'm going to flatten this image, discard hidden layers, okay. And now I have it as a background. Now I can say file, save as, and name this my final project. And instead of Photoshop, I'm going to save it as a JPEG. Say okay. And I think for our purposes, let's go to our image size here. And now let's reduce this size of this image. I would like you to upload this image at this size to the project submission. But what I would like for the, let's make this, let's say almost half. So let's say 9, or rather, let's do 8 by whatever that 5.16 is. Say okay. So I would like you to submit an 11 by 17 file to the assignment page. And then for project to critique discussion, I would like you to reduce its file size. So we'll reduce it to, I think, 8 by 5 and some change, and say okay. And then file save as. I'll just say CR for critique and say save. That way we make sure that the images are, we can really look at them without having to kind of scroll down the critique discussion. We can see them hopefully all on one when we're looking on our screen. Okay, so that will do it for this week. And if you have any questions, I'll have a problem solving, troubleshooting discussion board where you can post questions for things that you want to accomplish with Photoshop. And maybe I can help answer those.